I stood at the threshold of our living room, blood trailing from my nose, one eye swelling shut, the other blurred by tears. My legs were weak, the carpet beneath me spinning slightly, like the room couldn't decide whether to hold me up or let me fall. I tasted copper in the back of my throat, thick and metallic, as I tried to breathe without wincing. My chest ached, not just from the blows, but from the silence that followed them. And then I heard it. The front door opened. Noelle's heels clicked against the tile as she entered, the sound rhythmic and familiar, like it used to be when I waited eagerly to welcome her home. But now, I stood there like a wreckage waiting to be stepped over. She walked in, holding her bag with one hand and her phone with the other. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. No shock. No gasp. No flurry of concern. Just stillness. As if I were nothing but part of the furniture, a blemish in her sight line. And then she turned, without a word, and walked away. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out, slow and stinging. My heart didn't just hurt. It collapsed a little more in that moment. Behind her, Kieran and Damon followed like wolves who knew the sheepdog had stopped barking. They weren't even subtle. Damon smirked at me like it was a game he'd won. Kieran, still wiping his knuckles on a kitchen towel, had the audacity to whistle a tune I used to hum when I made breakfast. That sound stabbed deeper than his fists. "Look at that," Kieran said, easing into my armchair like it had always been his. "Told you he couldn't handle family." Damon chuckled, already pulling the tab on a beer can, foam fizzing at the top. He flinches like a stray dog. Pathetic. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My tongue felt too thick, too clumsy. My jaw was tender, swollen. I lifted my hand slowly, touched the side of my face where Damon had landed the last hit, and winced. Kieran's boots were still muddy, and he propped them up on the edge of the coffee table, tracking dirt across the surface where I used to place our photo albums. That table used to mean something. So did this room. Now it was just a cage with too many spectators and no one willing to open the door. The TV blared behind them, some action movie neither of them were really watching. They talked through it, laughed too loud, like they were trying to overwrite the sound of what they'd done to me. I leaned against the wall, still near the doorway, my body unsure whether it could make the trip down the hall. I didn't even trust myself to walk to the bathroom without collapsing. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not now. Not when my ribs still ached with every breath. Not when my wife had just walked past her battered husband and treated me like an eyesore instead of a man she once vowed to love. My thoughts kept spiraling back to that moment, her eyes. They didn't just miss me. They looked through me, as if I were already gone. I used to believe eyes couldn't lie. That if you really looked at someone, you'd find truth there. But hers? Empty. Cold. Maybe they used to hold something. I remembered when she used to wait for me to get home, when she'd peek from the window and greet me with a kiss that meant she missed me. I remembered her laugh in the morning, how it used to wrap around our kitchen like music. Where did that woman go? What replaced her? I finally pushed off the wall, each step shaky. I passed the entrance to the kitchen, where Kieran was rummaging through our fridge like it was his. "Hey," he called after me, grinning. "Grab me some ice for my hand. Will you?" Damon snorted, clearly amused by the irony. I didn't respond. Not with words. Just a glance. One long, slow stare. Not defiant, just tired. Tired of being the target. Tired of letting their nonsense drip into my sanity. Tired of being in a house where my voice didn't matter. But still, I didn't raise it. I never did. That was my crime, I guess. I let things slide. I rationalized. I told myself, they're her brothers, they're just going through stuff. Or, it'll stop. It's just temporary. 2 months ago, that was true. 2 months ago, they were guests. Now, they were predators. And I was the prey that stopped running. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and stared into the mirror. What looked back at me wasn't a man. It was a ruin. Swollen cheek, cracked lip, dried blood still clinging to the edge of my nostrils. My eye was almost shut now, the purple darkening like a storm bruise in the sky. I rinsed my face, not because it would fix anything, but because it was the only thing I could control in that moment. The water was cold. Too cold. But I let it run, watched the pink-tinged droplets spiral down the drain. I cupped my hands and splashed again, this time letting out a slow breath. Not quite a cry, not quite a growl out. Just a sound that belonged to a man who didn't recognize himself anymore. I looked down at my wedding band. It still sat on my finger. Clean. Untouched. It mocked me. Because I wasn't married to a woman anymore. I was shackled to someone who walked away when I needed her most. Not even an "Are you okay?" not a glance back. Noelle always had a way of turning off her empathy like a switch. But I used to believe I had the key to turn it back on. Not anymore. I dried my face with a hand towel, avoiding the blood-stained one on the counter. Kieran had tossed it there earlier after I stumbled into the sink. I stared at that towel, at the blood, at what it meant, and I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until that moment. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't temporary. This was who they were. And worse, this was who she let them be. I unlocked the bathroom door, not because I felt safe, but because I knew the door wouldn't protect me anyway. I stepped back into the hallway, the laughter from the living room rising again like a tide. And with every step I took, I began to understand that tonight had changed something in me. Something permanent. I just didn't know what to call it yet. I shut the bathroom door behind me with more care than I should have. Not because I was trying to be quiet, but because slamming it would have taken more strength than I had left. My legs felt like wet rope, and the mirror across from me showed a man I didn't quite recognize, blood smeared across my upper lip, purple blooming across my cheek like a storm cloud, one eye narrowing against the pressure building behind it. I moved like I was underwater, each step and gesture a delayed echo. I turned the faucet on and leaned in, hands trembling as I caught the stream in my palms and splashed cold water over my face. It didn't sting like I thought it would. The numbness had already spread that far. Water ran down my chin, and I watched the red swirl in the sink, disappearing as if it had never been there. I stood there, dripping, letting the sound of rushing water fill the void where rage should have been. But there was no rage. Not yet. Just hollow silence inside me and cruel noise outside. I heard them in the living room, Kieran and Damon, like nothing had happened. The TV blared, but I could still make out their voices through the wall. They were arguing over a basketball game, laughing, shouting like kids who just want to brawl at recess. Maybe they had. My ribs reminded me of it with every breath I took. I grabbed a towel, one of mine, one I used when Noelle and I still shared mornings, and pressed it against my face. It was clean. For now. The fabric quickly darkened with pink. The ache in my jaw pulsed with each heartbeat. I didn't know if anything was fractured. Didn't care. I wasn't in the bathroom to heal. I was in there because I had nowhere else to be. No one had followed me. No knock. No soft voice outside the door. Noelle hadn't checked on me. She'd walked into the room, seen me bloodied, broken, and then walked right back out. I stared at my reflection as that realization rooted itself deeper. I always thought if something terrible happened, if I were ever hurt in a real way, she would care. That even with all the distance that had grown between us lately, she'd still kneel beside me and ask if I was okay. I thought maybe the vows would echo somewhere inside her, shake something loose. But no, her silence hadn't been shock. It had been choice. And it hurt worse than any punch I took tonight. The longer I stayed in the bathroom, the more that truth wrapped around me, heavier with each minute. She chose them. Not once. Not out of panic. Repeatedly. My body leaned against the counter, one arm barely holding my weight. I stared down at the tile and thought about the first time I met her family. I remembered how Bernard shook my hand with a firm nod, how Yvonne had kissed my cheek, how her brothers had given me those 2 hard pats on the back and joked about protecting their sister. Back then, I took it as bluster. Family posturing. Nothing serious. But now? Now I understood it for what it was. A warning disguised as affection. And tonight, the warning arrived on my face like a signature. 30 minutes felt like hours in that bathroom. I checked the time at least 4 times, thinking someone would knock. Thinking maybe the house would go quiet and Noelle would slide a note under the door or call through the wood. But nothing. Just the hum of television and their laughter that didn't fade. I thought about walking out, standing in the middle of the room and screaming, telling them what cowards they were. But I knew how that would end. Kieran wouldn't stand down. Damon wouldn't flinch. And Noelle wouldn't move. I was a bleeding man inside his own home, and I was the intruder now. Somewhere in the other room, a can cracked open again. More beer. More laughter. I closed my eyes and imagined I was somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. The cabin we talked about getting, but never did. The lake she once said she loved as a girl. I tried to hold on to any scrap of peace I could manufacture in that moment. But nothing held. I pressed another towel to my cheek and sat on the edge of the tub. I counted my breaths. In. Out. 1. 2. 3. I needed the minutes to pass. I needed to believe this would all make sense when it was over. But the longer I sat, the more I understood that there wouldn't be any answers. There wouldn't be justice unless I reached for it myself. I had let things fester. I'd made excuses. They're just crashing for a bit. They're her family. This is temporary. But tonight broke that illusion. This wasn't temporary. It was erosion. And the worst part wasn't even the fists. It was that she saw it happen and left me in it. The woman I married, the woman I once believed would fight the world with me, she stood 10 feet away and chose not to speak. She chose to let me bleed in silence. And that kind of pain rewrites a man. I stood again, slower this time, as if I'd aged 20 years. My hands still trembled, but my spine straightened. Something inside me had hardened, not anger, not revenge, but a certainty. I couldn't stay here much longer. I splashed my face again, wiped it clean, looked one last time into the mirror. I didn't like what I saw, but at least now, I saw it. I opened the door finally, the hallway lights spilling into the room like they were trying to invite me back into a world that didn't want me. The laughter was still there. So was the TV. I walked back down the hall, step by step, not toward them, but toward something I couldn't name yet. Not hope, not escape, but maybe the moment before both. 32 minutes. I counted them. Every second, every tick of the wall clock above the hallway thermostat. The laughter had slowed, but not stopped. Kieran switched the channel twice. Damon ordered wings on speakerphone like they hadn't just used me as a punching bag. I sat at the edge of the couch now, cleaned up but not presentable. The swelling around my eye throbbed with a pulse of its own. I didn't know what I was waiting for, an apology? A word from Noelle? I wasn't naive enough to think she'd suddenly appear with a wet cloth and remorse in her eyes. But some part of me, some stupid part that hadn't been beaten out of me yet, still waited for something. Then I heard it. The deadbolt turned. That metallic click struck deeper than any insult. For a second, everyone paused. Even Damon stopped chewing. The door opened, creaking on the hinge I'd oiled last week. Noelle stepped in first, her purse hanging from her elbow, her face unreadable. And behind her, Bernard, her father, and Yvonne, her aunt. My gut twisted. Bernard was still built like a man who worked with his hands even though he hadn't in years. Strong jaw, thick fingers, eyes that missed nothing. Yvonne was shorter, stockier, with her hair swept into the same neat bun she'd worn since the day I met her. She saw me first. She gasped. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just enough for the temperature in the room to shift. Her hand flew to her chest. "Dear God," she whispered. Bernard's face didn't move. Not until his eyes adjusted and landed on me. Then his brow dropped. "What the hell is this?" he barked, stepping into the room like he owned it. Which, technically, he once did. This apartment had been Noelle's before we got married. He'd helped her with the down payment. Maybe that's why he stepped forward like someone reclaiming land. I stood slowly, unsteady on my feet but unwilling to sit in front of him like I was some wounded pet. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Didn't matter. Kieran was already fumbling with the beer in his hand, trying to set it down like this was all just casual. Damon froze mid-bite, chicken wing still in his grip. The silence that followed was different from the silence that came when Noelle ignored me. This one was electric, crackling with held-back anger. Yvonne moved first, rushing to me, her hands reaching for my arm, my face, like a nurse doing triage. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice shaking. I tried to shake my head, to say it didn't matter, but my voice cracked. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to protect anymore. Kieran laughed. He probably fell, he said, reaching for the remote like this was just bad timing. You know how clumsy some people can be. Yvonne whipped her head toward him so fast her earring fell out. Bernard didn't speak yet. Not to me. Not to the idiot sitting in our living room. He turned to his daughter. His voice was low, deadly. You knew. Noelle didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Just looked off toward the window like she was watching traffic. That was enough. Get out, Bernard said, his voice still calm. That scared me more than if he had yelled. Kieran scoffed. You can't kick us out. This is family business. He stood, all 6 foot something of him, squaring his shoulders like he was about to make a case. He's not even blood, Damon added, finally putting down the wing, his fingers slick with sauce. Just a name on paper. Bernard turned slowly. He didn't raise his hand, didn't shout. Just stepped forward with the kind of presence that made both men hesitate. And you're parasites, he said evenly. You walk into someone's home, beat him bloody, and laugh about it? His voice dropped even lower. You think I raised Noelle for this? You think I'm going to stand here while you turn my family into a pack of cowards? Kieran opened his mouth again, but this time Damon grabbed his arm. Let's go, Damon muttered, already reaching for his jacket. We'll be back, Kieran grumbled. You'll see. Yvonne took a step toward them. No, you won't, she said. Not here. Not again. They left. Not quickly, but not confidently either. The door slammed behind them with a thud that shook something loose inside me. It wasn't relief. Not yet. But it was something like space. Like air returning to the room. I stood there in the quiet that followed, stunned. Noelle hadn't said a word. Not even as her father took her brothers apart, with only his eyes. She watched. Detached. Like a guest in her own life. Bernard turned back to me, the anger draining from his face now, replaced by something more complicated. Disappointment? Guilt? I didn't know. Sit down, he said. Not a command. Just a gentle instruction. And for once, I obeyed without question. The dining table was still set from dinner 2 nights ago, forks out of place, napkins crumpled. I sat where I always did, back to the kitchen, facing the hallway. Yvonne followed, her hand still lightly on my shoulder like she wasn't sure whether to comfort me or keep me upright. Noelle stayed standing. Bernard looked at her for a long time, like he was waiting for her to speak. She didn't. This what marriage looks like to you? He finally asked. This what you signed up for? No response. Not a nod. Not a denial. Just that same faraway stare. He shook his head slowly. Then he looked back at me. This isn't over, he said. But it starts now. I couldn't speak. Not yet. But in that moment, with the bruises fresh and my dignity torn and my wife practically erasing herself from the moment, I felt something for the first time in weeks. Seen. Heard. Not by her, but by someone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep breathing. Yvonne's fingers trembled against my arm. She hadn't let go since I sat down, like she was afraid I might slide off the edge of reality if she did. Her eyes kept darting across my face, scanning every bruise, every cut, every swollen pocket of skin like she was memorizing them. Bernard didn't sit. He paced behind Noelle now, slowly, like a lion assessing the distance before the strike. But it wasn't rage in his eyes. It was betrayal. Deep, aged betrayal, the kind that stung worse because it came from someone you raised. Noelle stood like a statue, rigid, unflinching, her arms crossed over her chest, as if that could shield her from the truth thickening in the air. Yvonne finally broke the silence. Who did this? Her voice was softer now, but the anger still laced it. Her gaze was fixed on me, but the question wasn't really for me anymore. She was baiting the room, daring someone else to answer, daring the lies to start. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Kieran, arrogant to the core even in retreat, scoffed from where he lingered at the edge of the hall. He probably fell. I turned to look at him, my eye barely open on that side, and he smiled. Just slightly. Damon didn't say a word, but his silence was guiltier than any sentence Kieran could have crafted. But Bernard wasn't looking at them. He was staring at Noelle. And in that moment, the weight of his gaze was more brutal than any fist I'd taken that night. You knew, he said. 3 words, low and slow, landing like stones on the floor between them. Noelle didn't answer, didn't flinch. She just looked at the window, like something outside had captured her attention. But that blank stare. I knew it. I'd lived under it for months. It was the same expression she used when I asked if everything was okay between us. When I said I missed the way she used to laugh. When I reached for her hand in bed and she rolled away. Detachment dressed up as calm. But for Bernard, it was enough. Her silence was louder than any confession. He stepped forward. Get out, he said. Not yelling. Not flinching. Just commanding. Kieran's laugh came too quickly, like he couldn't believe what he'd heard. You can't kick us out, he said, gesturing to himself and Damon. This is family business. I just did, Bernard growled. There was something ancient in his voice when he said it, something that didn't ask permission. He wasn't just a father now. He was an anchor, a line in the sand. And they knew it. Even Kieran, who had been puffing his chest all night, deflated just a little. Damon muttered something under his breath, something about needing to grab his charger, but no one moved. Bernard took another step. You laid hands on a man in his own home. You mocked him while he bled. And you expect me to treat you like kin. His voice rose slightly, sharp now, cutting through the false bravado like a blade. This isn't some frat house fight. This is assault. This is criminal. Yvonne, still beside me, turned her head sharply. And you, she hissed toward Damon. You watched it happen. And Kieran, she didn't finish. Her voice cracked. I hadn't realized I was gripping the edge of the table until I felt my knuckles throb. I looked down. My hand was clenched tight, the skin stretched white. I wanted to say something, to back Bernard up, to add my voice to the weight finally being hurled against them, but my throat locked. I was still too raw, still reeling from the way Noelle stood like none of this touched her. Kieran finally moved. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch, muttering something about ungrateful old men, and Damon followed. Slower. They made no apology. No eye contact. They walked out the door with the same arrogance they brought in, but something in their pace betrayed them. They weren't used to being called out. And now they had been, publicly, firmly, finally. The door closed behind them with a hollow sound, and the silence that followed felt like a reset button. The house didn't feel clean, not yet. But the poison had shifted, like it had begun to recede. Yvonne looked at me then. Did they hit you before? Her question was a whisper. A test. I nodded, barely. First time was 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice hoarse. Kieran shoved me. Damon laughed. Noelle said it wasn't a big deal. Said I provoked them. Bernard's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch under his cheek. He looked at his daughter again. You let them do this to your husband? The way he said, husband, like it should have meant something sacred, made my stomach churn. Noelle's expression didn't change. You should have known better than to provoke them, she said, cold and clinical. Like we were discussing a boardroom strategy gone wrong. Yvonne inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. Bernard closed his eyes for a long beat. When he opened them again, something was gone. Not anger. Not yet. But faith. You stood by and watched them break him, he said. And you blame him for bleeding? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was her signature. I couldn't sit anymore. I rose slowly, every joint protesting. I looked at Noelle then, not for sympathy, not for regret, but because I needed to see if there was anything left of the woman I married. There wasn't. Just that same dead calm. She looked right past me. Again, like I was furniture, or a problem she'd hoped someone else would clean up. I think I need to leave, I said, voice trembling with shame and exhaustion. Yvonne reached for me, but it was Bernard who spoke first. You're not going anywhere alone, he said. You're coming with us. Noelle said nothing. She didn't ask me to stay, didn't say goodbye, didn't even blink. The ride to Bernard and Yvonne's house was quiet. Not tense, just drained. Like everyone in that car had seen something they couldn't unsee. Bernard drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his jaw locked in a way that made the veins in his neck stand out. Yvonne sat beside him, dabbing her eyes every few seconds like she was trying not to cry but failing anyway. I sat in the back, my cheek pressed lightly against the cold window, the bruises on my face throbbing in time with the road's vibrations. I kept waiting for the questions. For the why didn't you say something or why didn't you leave? But they never came. And somehow, that was worse. Because their silence said they already knew. They knew I had swallowed every slight, every insult, every dismissive shrug from Noelle, and then every shove from her brothers. They knew I had stayed quiet long after I should have screamed. When we pulled into their driveway, Bernard cut the engine but didn't move right away. The porch light glowed faintly ahead of us, the wind nudging the chimes above the front steps. Yvonne turned around in her seat to look at me. We're not going to let this go, she said. Not anymore. Her voice was soft, but it had steel underneath. I nodded, though I didn't know what that meant. What not letting it go looked like. All I knew was I didn't want to sit in silence anymore. We stepped inside their house, and the familiar scent of cinnamon and something lemony hit me instantly. Yvonne's house always smelled like a memory. Safe, warm, real. Not the cold hotel lobby air Noelle insisted on pumping through our apartment. I sat at their dining table while Bernard disappeared down the hall and Yvonne made tea. My body still ached, but the worst pain was behind my ribs, where shame sat heavy like wet clothes. Yvonne placed a warm cup in front of me. Then she sat down, folded her hands, and asked the question no one had asked me in years. What happened? I stared at the steam rising from the mug. Then I told her. Not all at once. Not like some courtroom testimony, but piece by piece, like peeling back skin. I told her how things were okay for the first 2 years. Noelle and I had our rhythm, quiet mornings, shared playlists, and side jokes. But somewhere in year 3, she stopped reaching for my hand. She stopped laughing at my jokes. She stopped looking at me like I was someone she was proud to come home to. I blamed myself. I tried harder. Flowers. Dinners. Surprises. I thought maybe I was slacking. Maybe she was stressed. But then the criticism started. Little ones at first. Do you always chew that loudly? Maybe wear something less wrinkled next time. And then the ones that sank deeper. You're just too sensitive. Why do you always make things about you? I told myself they were just bad days, that we'd fix it. Then Kieran and Damon moved in. Just for a few weeks, Noelle said, until they get back on their feet. That was 2 months ago. The first week, they stayed out of the way. But then Kieran started making jokes at my expense. My cooking, my job, the way I sat. Damon echoed everything. When I brought it up to Noelle, she laughed it off. That's just how they are, she said. Don't be dramatic. The first shift came when I asked Kieran not to smoke in the living room. He pushed me into the coffee table. Damon laughed. Noelle told me I was being confrontational. After that, it escalated in strange, silent increments. A slap to the back of my head. A shove when I walked by. Beer bottles left near my side of the bed. Then tonight, when Kieran exploded because I asked him not to drink directly from the orange juice bottle. Damon jumped in. Noelle watched from the doorway. I bled. She blinked, then walked away. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, but by the time I finished, my throat burned and my vision was wet. Yvonne slid a tissue toward me. Bernard had returned to the room and stood behind her now, arms folded, eyes like stone. She let them do that to you, he said, not as a question. She watched it happen. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She told me I provoked them. I whispered that I should have known better. Yvonne made a sound, part gasp, part sob, but Bernard didn't flinch. He walked around the table, pulled out the chair beside me, and sat down. You've got bruises? He asked. More than what we can see? I nodded. Slowly, like I was admitting to a crime. Back. Side. A few ribs might be cracked. I don't know. Bernard nodded once. Then he looked at Yvonne. Start the file. Yvonne stood without hesitation. Already have, she said. Photos. Documentation. Dates. I've been watching them for weeks. I just didn't know it had gone this far. She disappeared down the hall and returned with a manila folder. She placed it on the table in front of me. It was thicker than I expected. I opened it. Inside were photos, some I hadn't even realized she'd taken. My swollen eye. The stained towel. Dates written in blue ink beside them. Notes about conversations she overheard. Even a voice memo transcript of Damon mocking me after I left the room once. I looked up at her, stunned. You were watching all this time? She nodded, eyes red. I had a feeling, but I didn't want to accuse without proof. I didn't know Noelle had let it get this far. Bernard leaned forward. You're not going back there, he said. That's not a suggestion. That's not up for debate. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. But I also didn't want to. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man trying to hold a marriage together. I felt like someone who had survived a war no one knew was being fought. Yvonne slid the folder closer. We'll take this to court if we have to. You're staying here now. We'll get your things when she's not home. You're done bleeding for someone who won't even look at you. Bernard looked at me, softening just slightly. You don't have to be ashamed. You've been hurt, but you're not alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Yvonne disappeared into the kitchen with the folder in her hand and determination in her eyes. I sat at the dining table, still gripping the edge like I might float away if I let go. Bernard hadn't moved. He just sat across from me, staring, not at me exactly, but somewhere just past me, like he was sorting through decades of memories and trying to find where things went wrong. I heard the click of the kitchen light, the soft shuffle of Yvonne's slippers, the hum of the refrigerator as she placed the folder on the counter and reached for her phone. Her voice came through low but firm, the way people sound when they've had enough. Hello, yes. I need to report an assault. 2 male suspects. Domestic residence. Ongoing abuse. I couldn't see her, but I could hear the shift in her tone, the way she answered each question with chilling precision. Full names. Address. Relationship to the victim. I was the victim. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a jacket I hadn't asked to wear but couldn't take off. Yes, Yvonne said into the phone. There's physical evidence. Photos, recordings, bruises. My nephew-in-law is staying with us now. He's not safe there. There was a pause. Then, yes, we'll be available to give statements. I looked over at Bernard, who was still watching me like I was made of glass. She told me I provoked them, I said, my voice hoarse. He blinked, slowly. I heard her, he muttered. She didn't even flinch. Yvonne reappeared from the kitchen, her phone still in hand. They'll send someone tomorrow to take a full report, she said. But I'm not waiting that long. I'm sending this folder to family court now. We're going to put something on record. She turned to Bernard. You still have the lawyer's email? He nodded. She walked away again, already texting, already scanning documents. She moved like a woman possessed not by vengeance, but by justice. I leaned back in the chair, my ribs protesting. I could still hear the echo of their laughter, Kieran and Damon, smug and stupid. I remembered the sound of the beer can popping open after they hit me, like they were celebrating. I rubbed my temple, slow circles against the pulsing ache. She let them, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone. She saw it. She stood there. She let them. Bernard didn't say anything at first. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You think I raised her to be like that? He asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was something heavier, disbelief braided with shame. You think I taught her to be cold? To abandon someone bleeding on her floor? I didn't know what to say. I shook my head, but it felt empty. Bernard exhaled through his nose and leaned back in the chair. Noelle wasn't always like this, he said. There was a time she would have done anything for you. Or at least I thought she would. I didn't have the energy to argue. I didn't need him to apologize for her. But I also knew he wasn't. He was trying to understand what he couldn't undo. Yvonne came back in, setting her phone on the table like a final move in a chess game. The files sent, she said, with copies to both Bernard's lawyer and mine. I looked at her. You have a lawyer? She smiled, just a little. I work with a lot of messy people, she said. And I learned early paper trails win wars. That's when Noelle's voice broke the calm. Her tone was sharp, incredulous, and suddenly very real. It came from Bernard's phone, sitting face down on the table. He picked it up slowly, eyes narrowing at the screen. It's her, he said. I swallowed hard. Yvonne leaned in. Put it on speaker. He did. Dad? Noelle's voice was clipped, rehearsed. Yvonne's reporting her own nephews? Seriously. Bernard didn't respond. You're going to let her blow up the family over a stupid misunderstanding? She continued. You weren't even there. I expected Bernard to yell, to defend me. But his tone was ice. I was there when I saw your husband's face, he said. That was enough. Noelle scoffed. He should have just stayed out of it. You know how Kieran gets. You mean violent? Bernard asked. Uncontrolled. You always take his side, she snapped. Ever since we got married, you've treated him like the son you never had. That stunned me. The resentment in her voice wasn't just about tonight. It had roots. Deep ones. I took his side, Bernard said slowly, because you stopped deserving mine. There was a silence. A pause that felt like the crack before lightning. You're choosing him over your own blood? She asked. I'm choosing decency, Bernard replied. Something you stopped showing the day you let your brothers turn your husband into a punching bag. You don't understand, she began. No, he cut in. You don't. You think this is about a single night? About some bruises? This is about what you became when no one was looking. And now, everyone's looking. He hung up. No dramatic click. Just a simple tap. Final. Yvonne blinked hard. She really tried to spin it. Like we'd fold. She's always been good at that, I said quietly. Reframing everything. Making it seem like I started it. But this time, Yvonne said, she's going to learn the difference between silence and permission. I didn't speak after that. I just sat there as Bernard picked up the phone again, not to call her, but to scroll through his contact list. Who are you calling? I asked. The bank, he said. Any property or account I co-signed for her. That ends tonight. You're serious? Deadly, he said. Let her call it betrayal. I call it a boundary. The shift was slow, but it was happening. The story she told was unraveling. And for once, I wasn't the one left trying to hold it all together. I didn't sleep that night. My body was still buzzing with the aftershock of everything, the pain, the phone call, the sound of Bernard hanging up on his daughter without flinching. I lay on the guest bed Yvonne had made up for me, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in a life that had once been mine. The bruises on my side ached if I shifted wrong. My face felt swollen against the pillow. But worse than all that was the hollow space inside my chest where love used to live. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was safe now. But my mind couldn't stop spinning, replaying every moment that led to tonight. The things I let go. The excuses I made. The way Noelle looked right through me. She hadn't called again, not after Bernard ended the conversation. And part of me hated how I still expected her to. How I still thought maybe, just maybe, she'd show up at the door, not with anger, not with defense, but with regret. But regret doesn't live in people like her. Not anymore. I was in the bathroom splashing cold water on my face the next morning when I heard it, the knock at the door. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't tentative either. It was a deliberate rhythm, meant to be heard but not mistaken for aggression. I froze, my hands dripping over the sink. The knock came again. I could hear the creak of Bernard's chair from the front room, then the shuffle of his footsteps. Yvonne's voice followed, low and cautious. "It's them," she said. I stepped into the hallway, towel still in my hand. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The police." Yvonne gave a small nod. "Two officers. Not in uniform, plainclothes. Must be detectives." I moved slowly toward the front room. Bernard opened the door wider, revealing two men. Both middle-aged, both wearing badges on their belts and calm, assessing expressions. The taller one stepped forward. "Mr. Morris?" he asked. "Yes," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. He gave a polite nod. "I'm Detective Harwood. This is my partner, Detective Jane. We're following up on a report filed late last night regarding an assault. Mind if we come in?" Bernard gestured toward the living room. "Please." They stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room like they were cataloging the entire atmosphere. Yvonne offered them water, which they politely declined. I sat down on the edge of the couch, still holding the towel in my hand like a lifeline. Detective Harwood opened a small notepad. "We've reviewed the statement sent by Mrs. Yvonne Langley and the attached evidence. Photos, timestamps, recordings. We also have an eyewitness report from a neighbor, a Mrs. Ralston, who says she heard loud noises and shouting around 9:30 p.m. from the apartment unit next door." "You're the victim in this case, sir?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." He looked at me closely now, taking in my face, my posture, the way I shifted slightly every few seconds to ease the pain in my ribs. "You mind if we take photos of the injuries directly?" he asked. "We'll be gentle." I glanced at Bernard, who gave me a small nod. "Okay," I said. I lifted my shirt slowly, the fabric dragging over the swollen bruises on my side. Yvonne looked away. Detective Jane stepped closer, took out his phone, and snapped a series of careful, angled photos. My face came next. I turned to the side, letting them document the swelling around my eye and the dried cut near my lip. Harwood jotted something down. "Do you recall exactly how the altercation started?" he asked. I told him everything again. How it started over orange juice. How it wasn't about juice at all, but about power, control. How it wasn't the first time, just the worst time. Jane listened quietly while Harwood wrote. "Were there any weapons involved?" he asked. "Just fists," I said. "And words. Was your wife present?" I nodded. "She saw everything. She walked in right after it happened. Looked at me. Then walked away." The detectives exchanged a glance. "Did she participate in the violence directly?" "No. She didn't need to." My voice was quiet now. "She gave them permission every day they stayed in that house." Harwood nodded slowly, flipping the notepad shut. "Thank you for being honest. We've also received confirmation that your wife's father has revoked any financial co-ownership on her properties and assets, correct?" Bernard stepped in. "That's right. I called the bank first thing this morning. Had my name removed from the title. The apartment and her accounts are now her sole legal responsibility. We'll need documentation of that," Jane added. "Already scanned," Yvonne said, producing a folder. "You'll find a full paper trail in there, including our original statement, call log, and neighbor affidavit." The detectives exchanged a brief look, something like impressed. "You two are thorough," Harwood said. "We've had cases collapse over lack of follow-through. This won't be one of them." Then Harwood looked at me. "Mr. Morris, if you're willing, we'd like to file charges against both Kieran and Damon Langley. You don't have to decide now, but we strongly recommend it. We're also opening an investigation into your wife's complicity. You may not want that, but I do," I said. Immediately, without hesitation. "I want the charges filed." Harwood nodded. "Understood. You'll also be required to submit a formal written statement. We'll send someone to collect it by the end of the day. You'll likely be called to testify." "Okay," I said. "Whatever it takes." Jane stepped forward. "There's one more thing. We'll be issuing a temporary protection order. It covers you against any contact or approach by Kieran or Damon. If Noelle attempts to interfere, we can include her in the motion." I nodded. "Please do." Harwood stood and extended his hand. I shook it, my grip weaker than I wanted it to be. "We'll be in touch. And we're sorry you had to go through this. No one deserves it." They left with the folder in hand, and the door clicked shut behind them. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was the kind that comes after a storm. The kind where you realize you've survived, but the damage is still fresh. Yvonne sat beside me. You did good, she whispered. I didn't answer. I just nodded. For the first time, the fear was starting to leave, and something else was taking its place. Resolve. We left for the hospital just before noon. I hadn't planned to, hadn't even thought about going, but Bernard insisted. Let a doctor document it, he said. You want a clean record, something that isn't just photos on a phone. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to. I moved like a man watching himself from outside his own body, each step deliberate, cautious, as if the floor might shift under me without warning. Yvonne rode in the back seat with me, a soft bag in her lap, and sided, the folder. The one she'd been building long before I knew I needed it. She held it like something fragile, like it was more than paper and pictures and timelines. And in a way, it was. It was the first time someone had believed me enough to gather proof. The waiting room at St. Clara's was cold. The kind of sterile cold that sinks into your bones and makes you forget what warmth feels like. We didn't wait long. The nurse took me back quickly after seeing the bruising on my face. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a hospital gown and closed the curtain behind her. When I came out, she looked at me a little too long, like she was deciding whether or not to say something personal, and then handed me a clipboard with a form labeled injury due to assault. Yes/no? I checked, yes. The doctor came in 10 minutes later. Older man, kind eyes, gentle hands. He introduced himself, but I forgot his name before he finished the sentence. He examined my ribs, took notes on a tablet, and asked questions with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd seen too much to be shocked anymore. Pain level, 1 to 10? 7, maybe 8 when I move wrong. Any previous injuries? Not like this. He glanced at my face. Who did this to you? 2 men. My wife's brothers. His brow lifted slightly. And your wife? Watched, I said. His hands paused for a moment before continuing the exam. They took x-rays. A nurse cleaned the cut on my cheekbone. They offered me a prescription for painkillers, but I declined. I wanted to feel everything. I didn't want to be numb, not anymore. While they ran their tests, Yvonne filled out additional paperwork at the front desk. Bernard stood outside the exam room, arms folded, a wall between me and the world. I had never seen him this still, this contained. It was like he had taken all his rage and stuffed it into his spine to keep it from exploding. When the doctor returned with the results, he spoke carefully. You've got 2 fractured ribs. One is just a crack, the other's deeper. It'll take time, but they should heal fine without surgery. Just rest. Ice. No lifting. No sudden twisting. He handed me a printed report. We'll send a full copy to your email as well. He didn't say, you're lucky. I appreciated that. Luck didn't belong anywhere near this story. When we got back to the house, Yvonne pulled the folder out of her bag like she'd been waiting for the perfect moment. We sat at the kitchen table, Bernard standing behind me again, hands on the back of the chair like he needed to brace himself. Yvonne opened the file and started inserting the new pieces, medical reports, hospital documentation, notes she'd made during the visit. She even slid in the empty prescription slip the doctor had offered. Details matter, she said when I looked at her. Every gap they try to poke in your story, we'll fill it before they even find it. The file had grown fat, and it wasn't just a folder anymore. It was a lifeline, a shield, a weapon. It was every bruise that Noelle dismissed, every time Kieran and Damon laughed in my face, every silent moment where I sat in my own house, waiting for kindness that never came. Yvonne labeled the news section, medical confirmation, June 19th, using neat, all capital letters. I'm going to scan it all again, she said. I'll send it to the detective's inbox before dinner. I stared at the folder. You really had this started before last night? Yes, she said, not flinching. Because I saw what was happening. I just didn't know when you'd be ready to leave. That sentence caught me off guard. When you'd be ready to leave. Not if. Not maybe. She knew. She had known for a while. Bernard finally spoke again, his voice low and even. You're not the first man to stay too long in something broken. But you're going to be one of the first to walk away with a record strong enough to burn it all down if they come looking. I didn't speak. I couldn't. There was something about the way they were standing with me, not trying to fix me, not pitying me, that made my throat close up. I'd gone so long without backup, I'd forgotten what it felt like. Later that evening, Yvonne handed the folder to me again. She sat across the table, leaning forward slightly. I want you to keep this tonight, she said. I'll scan it all, but this stays in your hands. Why? I asked. Because you need to remember what you're carrying, she said. Not just evidence, but truth. The kind they can't spin. The kind that wins when all the smoke clears. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder. It was heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. Inside it was my story, one I hadn't known how to tell, one I hadn't believed anyone would care about. But they did. Bernard and Yvonne had made it real. That night, I sat in bed with the file beside me on the nightstand. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just knowing it was there gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Not safety, not even justice, but momentum. I wasn't stuck anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. The file wasn't just for court. It was for me. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that the bruises weren't imagined, that the silence I'd been drowning in wasn't my fault. And for the first time in months, I turned off the light and slept. 2 days later, I found myself back in the precinct lobby, not as a bystander or victim this time, but as someone ready to speak for himself. The bruises on my face were yellowing now, blooming into that final stage of healing where the pain dulled, but the memory didn't. I sat alone in one of the hard plastic chairs, the folder Yvonne had prepared resting on my lap. Inside was everything: medical reports, photographs, printed statements, even a copy of the protection order they'd issued that morning. It didn't matter that I was sore or tired or unsure of what came next. I was done watching other people write the story of what happened to me. This time, the words would be mine. The door to the precinct opened with a gust of air, and Kieran strolled in like he was showing up to a game night. His smirk was as wide as ever, sunglasses propped lazily on his forehead. Damon followed behind, looking a little less sure of himself, eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out who knew what. The moment Kieran saw me sitting there, his smile faltered just slightly, but he kept walking, nodding to the front desk officer like he owned the place. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just sat there, still and quiet, letting the folder rest in plain sight on my knee. The officer behind the desk called out their names and motioned for them to sit. They dropped into the chairs across from me, not 10 feet away, the silence between us stretching tight. Kieran leaned forward. "Look who finally grew a backbone," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Damon gave a half laugh, but his voice cracked in the middle. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The folder said enough. They knew it. I watched Kieran's eyes flick toward it, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind the arrogance. Fear. Not big, not loud, but enough to register. Enough to satisfy something deep in me that still ached to be believed. 10 minutes later, Noelle walked in. I didn't recognize her at first, not because she looked different, but because she moved differently. Slower, stiffer. Her usual confidence had wilted, replaced with something colder. She wore a navy blue suit, hair pinned tight, no jewelry, no expression. Beside her was a man in a gray pinstripe suit holding a leather briefcase. Her lawyer. She saw me sitting there. Her eyes landed on my face, on the bruise that still hadn't completely faded, on the folder I held. And for the first time since this all began, I saw something in her expression crack. It was quick, half a second, maybe less. But it was real. Her lawyer leaned down and whispered something to her, and she nodded once, never looking away from me. They called my name first. I stood and walked down the hallway behind the front desk, past the security doors, and into one of the small conference rooms they used for formal interviews. The detective from earlier, Harwood, sat waiting with a notepad open in front of him. "You brought your folder?" he asked. I nodded and placed it on the table between us. He opened it with the reverence of someone flipping through a historical document. "You've done most of our job already," he said, scanning the neatly labeled sections. "This is clean, organized, compelling." I didn't answer. I just stared at the wall behind him, trying to keep my breathing steady. After a few minutes, he looked up. "You still want to press charges against Kieran and Damon?" "Yes," I said. "And Noelle." That one made me pause. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about truth. "Yes," I said again, this time with more weight. She stood by. She didn't just let it happen. She let it become normal. He nodded, clicked his pen, and began writing. I gave my full statement, line by line. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't downplay it either. I told the truth. All of it. When I was done, he slid the form across the table for my signature. I signed it without hesitation. When I stepped out into the hallway again, I saw Noelle across the room, standing near the coffee machine, arms folded tightly. Her lawyer was pacing beside her, talking fast. When she noticed me, she straightened and took a step forward. "Wait," she said. I stopped. We don't have to do this, she said. You could have come home. We could have talked. Her voice was measured now, softer. But behind it, I could hear the gears grinding, the performance unfolding. We can fix this, she added. You and me. I studied her for a long moment. She still looked like the woman I married. Same eyes, same voice. But whatever version of her I used to love had long since been hollowed out and replaced with someone who saw pain and walked away from it. There's nothing to fix, I said. I'm not coming back. This will ruin everything, she whispered. You know that, right? Kieran and Damon could go to jail. My reputation was built on silence. I cut in. And I'm done being quiet. Her face twitched, just once. Her lawyer returned to her side, glaring at me like I was the problem. But I didn't care. I'd already done the hard part. I'd already left. I walked past her without another word. I didn't look back. That night, Bernard sat across from me in his den, an old whiskey in his hand. She came by earlier, he said. Tried to talk to me. What did you say? I asked. That she broke it. Not me. Not you. Her. I nodded. She doesn't get it, I said. She might never. Let her learn, he replied. It's not your job to teach her anymore. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Just 2 lines. Come home. We can fix this. I didn't reply. I stared at the screen for a long time, then turned the phone over and left it face down. Some people only hear the truth when the silence finally grows louder than the excuses. The morning light filtered in through the guest room curtains with a soft gold warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the sun, it was the stillness, the quiet that didn't carry tension, the absence of footsteps I braced against or voices waiting to tear into me. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, careful not to move too fast. The ribs still ached, the skin still pulled tight in places, but it wasn't the pain that defined me anymore. It was the clarity. I stood slowly, walked across the room, and paused in front of the mirror hanging on the back of the door. I looked at myself, not glanced, not skimmed, but really looked. The swelling around my eye had mostly faded, but the coloring still clung like a memory. My jaw held a faint line of yellow, the final trace of a bruise that once screened. My ribs, hidden under a black t-shirt, felt like a map only I knew how to read. But the real difference wasn't on my skin. It was in my eyes. The man staring back wasn't the one who flinched at jokes passed off as brotherly teasing, or who stayed silent to keep the peace. He wasn't the man who washed blood out of towels in secret or measured every word around the woman he loved so she wouldn't sigh like she was bored of him. No, this man had been through a war. And somehow, he was still standing. My fingers brushed the side of my face gently, the bruised skin beneath still tender. But I didn't wince. I just breathed. Bernard's old apartment was small, but it carried a quiet dignity. He hadn't used it in years, kept it as a backup, he said, in case retirement felt too loud at home. He offered it to me after the paperwork had been filed, after the restraining orders were issued, after the detectives had taken their final statement. It's yours now, he said, for however long you need it. I hadn't known what to say then. Still didn't. But I'd accepted the key with both hands like it was something sacred. And in a way, it was. It wasn't just a place to stay. It was a place to begin. I stepped out into the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee reached me before I saw the machine blinking. Bernard had dropped off groceries the day before, simple things. Bread, eggs, fruit, coffee. But it was the note taped to the bag that hit me hardest. You don't owe anyone your silence ever again. But I left it on the fridge, right next to a photo I'd placed with trembling hands. Me and Noelle, back when smiles came easy. I didn't put it there to remember what I lost. I put it there to remind myself of what not to return to. After breakfast, I changed into jeans and a light jacket, pocketed the paperwork, and headed down to the courthouse. Today was the day. I had an appointment to finalize the restraining orders, deliver additional documentation, and file a notice of separation. Not a divorce, at least not yet, but a step, a big one, a line drawn with ink. The courthouse smelled like every government building, faintly of paper and plastic and waiting. But I didn't wait long. A clerk called my name, took the envelope I carried, and nodded through the glass. You did everything right, she said after scanning the contents. This'll move fast. I nodded, thanking her quietly. On the way out, I passed a group of people waiting near the steps, young, old, a few with folders of their own. One woman looked at me as I passed. Her lip was split. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the purple blooming across her cheekbone. Our eyes met for a second, I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just gave her what I hoped looked like quiet understanding. She gave it back. It wasn't solidarity built on tragedy, it was recognition. Survivors speak in glances too. Back at the apartment, I sat on the couch and opened my laptop. I hadn't touched it much in the last week. Emails had piled up. Notifications from work. Friends who'd seen the news. Yes, it had made the rounds after the charges were filed. Kieran and Damon had been picked up the night before at some bar near Eastview, trying to charm their way through half a dozen beers and into someone's guest list. They didn't see it coming. The arrest. The witness statements. The photos. It wasn't even dramatic. Just quiet justice landing with weight. Yvonne had sent a message earlier. Court filings moving ahead. I added 2 affidavits from your neighbors and a statement from the building manager. Keep going. You're doing it. Bernard followed with a simple text. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. I read them both twice. Then I closed the laptop and leaned back. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt still, like my feet were finally planted in something solid. That night, I went for a walk around the block. The sky had turned lavender, dusk bleeding into the edges of the street lamps. I passed a father holding his son's hand. A couple laughing quietly as they crossed the road. No one knew who I was. No one looked twice. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I was writing my own now. When I got back, I took one last look in the mirror. I didn't touch the bruises this time. I didn't study them like a puzzle I had to solve. I just stood there, breathing. The silence in the apartment wasn't heavy. It was clean, clear, mine. Noelle hadn't called again. No new messages. And I was glad. I didn't want closure. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want the guilt-laced invitations back into her narrative. What I wanted, what I needed, was peace. And I had it now. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But enough. Enough to take the next step. Enough to live. And for the first time in years, the man in the mirror looked back without flinching.